Rain poured over a quiet street in Detroit as Maggie wiped her hands on a grease-stained rag. At 22, fierce and often mistaken for the receptionist, she had rebuilt engines since she was 16 under her late father's mentorship. Her small garage had only 3 bays and a leaky roof, but it was the only home she had left after losing him. That morning, a flatbed arrived carrying what looked like the corpse of a 2023 McLaren Artura. The engine cover was gone. The interior was stripped. It looked hopeless. But Maggie leaned closer and saw what others didn't. A challenge waiting. The man who stepped out of the flatbed wore a dark coat and held a clipboard like it meant something. He squinted through the rain. "Name's Rick. This wreck belongs to a collector out in LA. He had it shipped across the country hoping for a miracle. Said McLaren's own engineers gave up." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "So why me?" Rick shrugged. "You were the only one who didn't say no." Before she could respond, he walked off. The rain didn't let up. Neither did the thought circling her head. What had everyone missed that she could actually find? That night, with water dripping into buckets and the sound of thunder shaking the roof, Maggie set the McLaren on her lift and stared at it like a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. She spread out, blueprints and diagrams on her father's old workbench, tracing the damaged hybrid system with a pencil. Her hands remembered things her mind hadn't yet figured out. She unscrewed panels slowly, studying every wire like it held a secret. Somewhere beneath the burnt metal and disconnected tech was something salvageable, something no one else believed in, and Maggie believed in things people didn't. By day, she clocked long shifts at an auto parts store, ringing up spark plugs and cleaning up aisle spills while thinking about wire loops and battery relays. At night, she was back under the hood with a flashlight in her mouth, and Rusty, her half-blind mutt, curled beside her. There was no lab, no assistants, no diagnostic machines, just her hands, her tools, and determination. The McLaren's hybrid module was toast. The wiring had melted like wax. The ECU was locked by software no one had cracked, but Maggie had something stronger than software instinct and relentless patience. She scavenged parts from old Priuses and wrecked BMWs. She visited junkyards and scrap shops, bargaining for damaged components she could salvage. Her fingers bled from stripped wires. Her nails were black from carbon soot. She soldered with care, patched circuits under a magnifying glass, and rewired the main control harness strand by strand. On the 29th night, just before sunrise, she turned the key and stepped back. The engine didn't scream, it whispered. A low, humming purr like a heart that hadn't beat in years. She dropped the wrench, stared at Rusty, and whispered, "We're not crazy. The sound carried into the neighborhood. A woman next door peeked through her blinds. An old man from 2 blocks over wandered in, curious. Then came teens with camera phones. One kid streamed it live. "Yo, this girl rebuilt a supercar McLaren couldn't fix." The clip hit TikTok, then YouTube, and within 2 days, millions had watched her bent over that engine, tightening bolts like it was second nature. Reporters called, magazines emailed, local news stopped by. Maggie ignored them all. She didn't want interviews. She wanted spark plugs to fire clean and pistons to run smooth. Her garage, usually silent and overlooked, became a magnet for curiosity. People gathered outside the roll-up door, hoping to see something miraculous. Maggie kept the doors down and the noise in. Her focus stayed absolute. She tested every sensor, rewrote segments of software manually, and fine-tuned the hybrid system's region sequence. She wasn't just repairing the car, she was reimagining it. She slept on a cot beside the lift. She scribbled notes in her father's old notebook, and every time someone knocked, she let them know, gently but firmly, "Come back when it's finished. I'm not done yet." By the 3rd week, word had reached across the country. Collectors whispered about a Detroit girl who brought the dead back to life. One LA-based automotive blog called her a prodigy working out of a tin shack. Another called her the engineer. Detroit forgot to hire. Still, Maggie didn't smile. She was exhausted. Her body hurt. Her fingers were raw. But she tightened the last bolt with a kind of quiet pride. Not arrogance, just the feeling that, somewhere wherever he was, her father had seen what she built. The McLaren was more than alive. It was awakened. The car had gone from scrap to sleek. The engine purred. The hybrid powertrain didn't just function, it thrived. Maggie detailed the interior herself, reupholstered the driver's seat with salvaged leather, and cleaned every button until it gleamed. The Friday morning after she completed it, a black Escalade pulled up outside. Rick stepped out, followed by two men in tailored suits. They looked around, clearly expecting more bigger shop, cleaner walls. Maybe someone older, but all they saw was Maggie in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, wiping her hands. Rick pointed to the McLaren. "We heard it runs." "That true?" Without a word, Maggie reached into her back pocket, tossed Rick the keys, and stepped aside. One of the suited men, a tall, graying man with a sharp jaw and eyes that missed nothing, slid into the driver's seat. He turned the key. The McLaren growled. The engine smoothed into a perfect rhythm. The hybrid screen lit up. Regenerative feedback kicked in. The men stood in stunned silence. The billionaire said nothing for a full minute. Then he stepped out and looked at Maggie like he was trying to understand how she even existed. Rick asked quietly, "Who taught you this?" Maggie's voice cracked just a little. "My dad, in this garage." The billionaire nodded, his face softened in a way that didn't match his expensive shoes. He turned to his assistant and whispered something. Then he looked back at Maggie and said only 3 words. "She's coming with us." Maggie blinked. "Where?" Rick smiled. "California. You're not going to believe what they've got waiting for you." But Maggie wasn't looking at Rick. Her eyes stayed on the McLaren, alive and roaring under the fluorescent lights. It wasn't about the ride, the job, or even the recognition. She'd brought it back. And somehow it had brought her back too. The next morning, Maggie stood frozen at Detroit Metro Airport, staring at the sleek Gulfstream G550 jet parked on the private runway. The closest she'd ever been to flying was patching up a car that belonged to a Delta mechanic. Rick walked up beside her, handed her a smooth leather duffel bag, and grinned. "Everything you'll need in LA, just say yes." Maggie looked down at Rusty, who was panting in the back seat of her truck. She raised an eyebrow. Rick chuckled. "Dog comes too." For a moment Maggie hesitated, but then nodded. Something told her this was no ordinary invitation. Inside the jet, everything smelled like leather and ambition. She sank into a wide seat opposite Mr. Lennox, the billionaire, who had once simply watched her turn a key. This time he spoke. "You didn't just fix a car, Maggie. You exposed something corporations ignore. I run a performance firm in Malibu. Not just speed we build. Machines ahead of their time. I want you to lead our new experimental division." Maggie blinked. "Lead?" He smiled. "Yes. You'll have your own team and full control. No politics, just creation." Maggie exhaled slowly, staring out the window. She didn't say no. California greeted her like a flashbulb. Paparazzi lined the airport gate. Reporters held mics with shaky hands. Maggie winced. The internet had done its thing. Viral videos of her fixing the McLaren had caught fire. Headlines screamed, "Detroit girl beats McLaren, the Mechanie." Whisperer, Grease Queen goes global. Lennox waved off the press, shielding her. "Ignore them," he said. "They'll disappear soon enough." But Maggie didn't care about the cameras. She cared about tools, bolts, blueprints. Lennox knew, so he gave her exactly that. A lab in Malibu designed to her liking. No glass offices, no meetings, just code, chrome, and silence. The lab smelled like potential cold steel and hot circuitry. Maggie rolled up her sleeves and scanned the room. CNC machines, 3D printers, hybrid dynamometers, and a dyno cell built underground. Her name was on the door. She got to work immediately. Among the shelved projects was a prototype, an abandoned hybrid concept buried by red tape. Maggie saw more than just wires. She saw opportunity. She rewrote the code line by line, stripped out the flawed hardware, and modified the regenerative circuitry to reroute energy losses. Her hands danced over diagnostics for hours. Within weeks, the car was alive again, louder, leaner, faster. Lennox invited CEOs, engineers, and old-school designers to the California Speedway for the unveiling. They came, expecting a speech. They got something else. Maggie strolled out in ripped jeans and a baseball cap, engine grease on her cheek. She held up the keys. "I didn't just fix your car," she said into the mic. "I built a better one." Then she slid behind the wheel and peeled off. The hybrid prototype roared down the track, wind-slicing and perfectly balanced. When the lap time popped up on the scoreboard, the crowd gasped. She'd shattered the record by 2 full seconds. When the car rolled back into the bay, silence gripped the spectators. One former McLaren engineer stepped forward, jaw hanging. "How did you do this?" Maggie stepped out, pulled off her cap, and answered plainly, "You had theory, I had hunger." The moment was clipped and spread like wildfire. The world now knew her name. Contracts poured in. Interview requests flooded Lennox's inbox. Engineering schools begged her to speak. But Maggie stayed quiet. She didn't want lectures. She wanted engines. Lennox smiled. He knew. He doubled her lab's budget and told her to hire whoever she needed. She hired Detroit. Her first hires weren't Ivy League grads. They were people like her old classmates who'd been overlooked, talented, single. Moms who never finished school. Former mechanics trying to get a fresh start. She turned her division into a family. Her rules were simple. No ego, no noise. Build things better. She even named the scholarship after her father, the Ray Morgan Mechanical Fund. It funded the education of kids who loved machines more than math exams. The lab grew. Their prototypes became legends. Lennox's firm tripled in value. Still, every 3 months, Maggie returned to Detroit to fix cars for free. Back home, the garage hadn't changed. The roof still leaked, the concrete floor still cracked, but every time she walked through the door, it felt sacred. She repaired engines for single mums, welded frames for broke teenagers, replaced brake pads for elderly veterans. She never advertised, but word always spread. Rusty curled up in the corner like nothing had changed, and maybe that was the point. One evening, as sunset painted the street gold, a little girl walked up holding a busted carburetor in both hands. "They told me you'd know what this is," she whispered. Maggie smiled gently. She kneeled beside the girl and took the part. "You want to learn how it works?" The girl nodded. Maggie opened the garage. "Do fully. Then you're in the right place." She flipped the light on. Dust floated. Through the air, Rusty perked up. The tools gleamed. That night, Maggie taught her how to disassemble a carburetor, how to clean jets, how to check the float bowl. The girl's eyes lit up the way Maggie's once had. Her heart felt full. For the first time since her father died, the garage didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a beginning. Back in Malibu, people called Maggie a genius, a visionary, a modern-day Henry Ford. She never accepted those labels. She didn't want to be admired. She wanted to build. Lennox once asked her, "Why do you keep going back to Detroit?" She answered, "Because it reminds me why I started." In truth, the grease under her fingernails wasn't just residue, it was history. Every time she tightened a bolt or rewrote a module, she heard her dad's voice in her head. "Trust the machine. Trust yourself more." That voice never left. It simply echoed louder when she stayed humble. One spring morning, a black SUV pulled into the Malibu facility. A senior engineer from Ferrari stepped out and asked to tour the lab. Maggie nodded, barely looking up from her blueprint. "You'll have to excuse the mess," she said. He chuckled. "This is cleaner than our floor." He stayed 3 hours. On his way out, he turned and said, "You changed how I see powertrains." Maggie just nodded. Later that week, Porsche called, then Mercedes, then NASA. Maggie didn't say yes or no. She kept working. That was her answer. People could chase her. She'd never chase fame. Awards came anyway. Time's Most Influential Women, Forbes Under 30 Innovators, and a keynote invitation at MIT. She accepted none, but quietly. Donated her award stipends to Detroit high schools for rebuilding their shop classes. One school painted her quote on their garage wall. "You all had access to theory. I had access to hunger." Maggie didn't attend the dedication, but she saw it on a student's Instagram. She clicked the post, hearted it, and went back to her engine work. In her world, the clank of tools was louder than applause, and that's how she liked it. Years passed. Maggie's name became legendary in automotive circles. Still, every project began the same way, with silence, curiosity, and an open hood. Lennox once said, "You rebuilt my McLaren, but you also rebuilt what I believed in." Maggie had just smiled. She didn't believe in fancy suits or billionaires. She believed in second chances, in giving overlooked talent a place to breathe, and in never letting the world decide your worth. The garage, the dog, the memory of her father, those were her constants. Everything else, the headlines, the money, the prestige, was just noise around the engine. One night, she stood alone outside her Detroit garage, now freshly painted but still humble. Rusty, older and slower, lay beside her feet. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "You were right, Dad. Engines speak. You just have to listen long." Enough. And then she laughed, wiped her hands on a familiar rag, and turned on the lights. Inside, 3 teenage girls waited, with notebooks. "Are we rebuilding the 92 Vetta today?" one asked. Maggie nodded. "Only if you can tell me why it's misfiring first." And with that, the next chapter began with questions, courage, and grease. She had never set out to inspire the world. But somehow, in fixing a car everyone gave up on, she fixed something deeper. She proved brilliance doesn't come with a title, a degree, or a spotless lab. It comes from hands that don't stop trying, from hearts that remember why they started, and from the quiet, relentless magic of a girl who walked out of a garage and never looked back except to light the way for the next.